where does Pepe Escobar live? Where is he based? I answered, I have no idea. All I know is he knows everything about everywhere. And that's why he's such a supremely interesting guest to join us on the mother of all talk shows this evening. And I mean it sincerely, Pepe. Now, I asked you on here to talk about the BRICS, and I promised that we shall, but I need to ask what you make of the events in Russia this afternoon and the presumed death of both the leader and the deputy leader of the Wagner group.
Wow, George, first of all, it's an enormous pleasure to talk to you and to your audience, of course. It's an explosive night here in Moscow. It's 11:30 p.m. and rumors have been swirling all over the spectrum for hours, in fact. It's confirmed. Yevgeny Prigozhin and his number two, his aide de camp, Dmitry Utkin, they are dead. They are confirmed dead. It has not been announced by Russia 24 TV officially, but it has been confirmed by Wagner. Not only that, the top honchos at Wagner are, as we speak, sitting down to put in place the contingency plans that they had for years, in fact, in case of the death of their CEO. It's a completely crazy situation in Moscow because there are all sorts of rumors and explanations and hypotheses concerning who killed Prigozhin. The CIA, the NSA, Putin, Shoigu, Gerasimov, the SBU, you name it. We don't know anything. One of the only things that we really know is that the plane was shot down. We don't know by whom. There's a lot of speculation that Russian anti-aircraft system did it. An S-300, not confirmed at all. Apparently, there was not a bomb on board. So you can imagine what's going to happen in the next 24 to 48 hours, right? And of course, this will not, that's very, very important. It's not going to change what Wagner is going to do in Africa. Very important. Prigozhin flew from Africa today. He arrived in Moscow, and then they took this Embraer plane to go to St. Petersburg. And then the accident or crash, whatever you want to call, happened. The thing is, what Prigozhin had already announced in early May, this means a month and a half before that extraordinary Maskirovka that happened in June 23, 24, the so-called coup against Putin, which was not a coup, was basically a union dispute between Prigozhin and Shoigu at the Ministry of Defense. So Prigozhin himself had already announced that Wagner was going to be reorganized in Africa or solidified in Africa as a sort of international body against all sorts of Al-Qaeda inspired or Al-Qaeda linked terror outfits operating in Africa in the famous tri-border area. This means Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. So this is not going to change. This is the plan, short, middle, and long term for Wagner. And this is directly linked to the Russian Ministry of Defense as well. So what's already happening, which is extraordinary, tonight, in fact, a lot of Wagner fighters who were in Belarus are flying back to Russia, and they're going to be directly incorporated into the Ministry of Defense. So whatever happened to Prigozhin, we can say one thing. The Prigozhin chapter, which is a sort of 10 Netflix series in one, especially these past few months, is over. But Wagner, incorporated in the Ministry of Defense and acting as a very, very strong force in the Sahel, in Africa, it's a given. What happened to Prigozhin, we'll only know in the next, I would say, days, not hours. It's very, very complicated. And considering that, I'll give an example. There are two Telegram channels that are linked to Wagner, that they are saying that the plane was shot down by a missile operated by the Russian Ministry of Defense. This is an extremely serious allegation with no proof, of course. It could have been a rogue operation, of course. It could have been something that rogue operators linked to the Ministry of Defense managed to get away with it because they had support from above. And considering that the feud between Prigozhin and Shoigu was something really, really hardcore, which is something that was confirmed personally to me by a Donbass commander who turned politician here in Moscow and said, yes, it's personal. Between Prigozhin and Shoigu, it's personal. So this whole story was basically a clash of egos. And now it's more or less resolved, at least for the moment.
Can the orchestra, though, play as well without its conductor and his deputy? Are these musicians capable of operating under new management? And what's the argument for having such a mercenary force? In any case, I, from the beginning, have said that it's an extremely unhealthy growth on the Russian body politic, that the state has to have a monopoly of that level of force, drawing my inspiration from Machiavelli's same conclusions. Shouldn't they just forget about Wagner now and everyone join the army?
In fact, George, they will forget about Wagner because Wagner will be renamed and will be incorporated into the Russian Ministry of Defense. So Wagner, as we know it, will continue, but under new, very, very special management. This means directly the Ministry of Defense. But the mandate and what they are supposed to do across Africa is not going to change. The same thing, it's what they did in Syria. They're going to replicate, and they're already replicating in Africa. And the Belarus chapter was a diversion, considering what happened these past few months, where they were threatening more or less to open a new front against Ukraine. And that drove the SBU and Ukrainian intelligence completely crazy. But that was a maskirovka as well. There was never any intention by Wagner and by the Minister of Defense to have Wagner operating inside Belarus. The focus is Africa. And now after what happened, what is still happening in Niger, which is the culmination of a long process of revolt against France Afrique, the French system in West Africa, and all shapes and forms of French neo-colonialism, the Russians have a great opportunity to have a sort of anti-terror and anti-foreign interference outfit operating from Western Africa all the way to Eastern Africa sooner or later across the Sahel. Let's say a belt from Mali all the way to Eritrea, for instance, against, of course, the usual suspects and French influence. So this is what's going to be played out in Africa next. And, of course, the usual suspects in the Pentagon, the Beltway, are absolutely terrified about it.
Now, I made the point earlier that one of the reasons why this would be an odd day for Putin to decide to kill Prigozhin was that this was a red letter day for BRICS, which is, of course, built upon, in part, Russia's prestige, strength, and advancing economy, and so on. And indeed, this was the very day that Putin addressed the BRICS. Now, you've been very excited about this BRICS summit. Why not? Has it lived up to your expectations so far?
Yes. Not yet. To answer you directly, George, not yet. In fact, this morning, all of us were following closely the speeches by the five leaders. Concisely, I would say that Putin and Xi basically delivered. They are both extremely aware of the ultra high stakes involved. But from Modi, from Lula, and from Ramaphosa, I would say was not exactly exciting. Modi basically, he had a campaign speech. He was basically saying, look how great I am, everything that I accomplished in India this past year or year and a half or 2 years. Lula was not the Lula that we're used to. He can be an absolutely outstanding speaker when he improvises. He was reading notes, and obviously these notes were not written by him. This is something we can tell right away. Even the way he speaks his Portuguese, you can tell right away that this is not Lula thinking, and this is not Lula arguing, you know. So he was below par considering his very, very high standards as a public speaker. And Ramaphosa was basically taking notes and basically repeating slogans that we are all familiar with, but without elaborating on them. Praising his colleagues for some of the things they said, of course, but they had already discussed that among themselves. So they knew exactly if they were in sync, and they are in sync about most of it, in terms of BRICS as a sort of new G7 or the real G20 from now on, or even an alternative United Nations, or the most important multilateral organization at the moment to organize the inclusion of the global south in international relations, the reach towards Africa, which is very, very important. The Chinese have been saying that for years, in fact. And it's no wonder that Xi Jinping tomorrow is going to have a meeting, only China and 40 or 50 heads of states from all over Africa, and also from the G77, which is the new non-aligned movement, which, by the way, George, the G77 is now G134. There are 134 developing nations on this group, on this non-aligned group, which is basically the cream of the crop of the global south. And they're all interested in BRICS, and they're all interested in discussing with BRICS, and they're all interested to have some of their members as part of BRICS. Which brings us to who is going to be part of BRICS Plus, which is something that they said, the South Africans said today, it's going to be announced tomorrow. There are two conflicting versions coming from the South Africans themselves. They're going to announce tomorrow the procedures for the new members of BRICS Plus, and there's another interpretation that they already have a list. What we managed to know so far is that we are very close, possibly, of a BRICS 10. At the moment, it's BRICS 5. The BRICS 10 will have Argentina. This was Brazil's vote, essentially, among the five. Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates. And what does that tell us? This is extremely important. It tells us that the BRICS are more or less getting closer and closer with OPEC plus. This is the energy angle, which in this case, geoeconomically is even more important than the geopolitical angle. But now we're going to have enormous producers of energy together sitting on the same table, including Russia, of course, Iran, Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Russia, and soon we may have Venezuela as well, and in the second batch, why not Kazakhstan? You know, can you imagine what this means in terms of having between 60 and 70% of the major producers of oil and gas sitting on the same table on a geopolitical level, not only in an organization that is strictly business and energy business like OPEC plus. This is I see this as the real game changer, because what's going to happen afterwards, the second step? They're going to start trading among themselves and with their customers in their local currencies, which is part and parcel of the discussions since yesterday in Johannesburg. How we're going to increase trade in our currencies, all of us 5 BRICS members. And if it's BRICS 10, the same thing will apply. So we're going to have dirham, we're going to have the Iranian rial, all part of this trade connectivity in local currencies. So I would say that the next 24 hours could be a game changer. Let's not have too many high expectations, of course. We all do. But if they dare, first of all, to publish the whole world to see, okay, the procedures for admission are that. They're not very complicated. All the 23 of you who applied sooner or later will get in. And all 40-something of you who expressed interested, we're open to all of you. So soon we're going to have BRICS 40, BRICS 45. Can you imagine that? It's possible, but not this year, George. I would say that the consolidation
I'm already imagining it.
Living these days. You already imagine it.
I'm already imagining
Fantastic.
it with excitement. Pepe Escobar, it's been a privilege for all of us to see and hear you again this evening. Don't be a stranger, and
my
stay
pleasure,
in touch.
George. Thank
Pepe
you.
Escobar, how wonderful character, and so learned and so worldly wise.